Kia ora, Aotearoa, and hello world. You are listening to the Yeah Nah podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. I'm Bronwyn Rideout, and with me are my co-hosts, Mark Honeychurch.
Hey.
A warm welcome back to Katrina Borthwick.
Hello.
And I'm not sure how many times we've had him on, Tim Atkin. Welcome back,
Hello.
Tim.
Thanks. I don't know either. Maybe twice.
I feel like we've had you on for more than that. We always get you on when we're talking about religion and doing reviews, and you're here for the same thing. Mark and Tim are going to be talking about our recent foray to Pororua to see Universe Design, which is a film about intelligent design that should have been sent back to the drawing board. Katrina is going to give us a lowdown on the updated guidance that the New Zealand Police is providing frontline officers on handling sovereign citizens. But first, it is my duty to report that Rationalist House has been subject to a case of vandalism. Most unusual indeed. Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about this crime and who we actually need to thank for it?
Thanking someone for vandalism, that's a little bit of an odd idea. But yeah, so I was up in Auckland just a few weeks ago for the AGM of the Rationalists and Humanists, the NZARH, and they have a building. They're lucky enough to have a physical building on Simon Street in Auckland. And the moment I walked into the building, walked through to the main room, I noticed that something was a little bit different with one of the portraits on the wall. And when I walked up to it, I noticed that there was a card that had been added. And this first picture that I saw was Ernst Haeckel. And he'd had a little card added, just slipped onto the bottom of the frame that said, Dead Old White Men Series. Ernst Haeckel, biologist and biological illustrator, devotee of Darwin. And I liked that someone had done this. I mean, the description is pretty serious, but the title, Dead Old White Men Series, I immediately clocked as being just a mention, a hint of the idea that basically pretty much all of the pictures that are in Rationalist House of rationalist leaders and progenitors, that these are all old white men.
They're
everywhere. And pretty much by now they're all dead. There was a picture of, there's a picture of Hitchens somewhere, but he's dead as well. He died over 10 years ago. So, no, I think they were all dead. But the series was really good. I put the images in my latest newsletter for the skeptics, and yeah, some of them were kind of funny comments. So, JBS Haldane, geneticist, socialist, atheist, committed to science, including nearly killing himself for data. H.G. Wells, sci-fi pioneer who hoped humanity would evolve out of stupidity. The jury is still out. It was great. I really enjoyed wandering around the house just looking for as many of these as I could find. I had an inkling already of who it was, and it turns out I was right that it was Patsy Spicer who had been doing this, and she's been very proactive, very busy and helpful with the NZARH in the last couple of years, and this is just one of the many things that she's done up there for the building, along with helping catalogue everything in the library and many other jobs. But yeah, I mean, you guys have seen the images. What did you reckon of how she's done?
I reckon that you put up 2 copies of Nietzsche.
What? When I do a lot of images at once in MailChimp, something weird happens where it gets the wrong image. It's happened enough times that I'd love to take the blame. But no, not my fault. This is MailChimp's fault. But thank you for letting me know.
But nonetheless, I thought it was funny. I had some chuckles there.
Yeah, she did really well. So Joseph McCabe, ex-priest who wrote over 250 books, explaining at length why he was no longer a priest. And Friedrich Nietzsche, that one is the really good one. Declared God dead, accidentally giving philosophy majors a personality for the next 100 years. Quite cutting, that one. But yeah, so they're all over the place. And in my article, I did mention that maybe it's time for the rationalists to get some pictures of someone that isn't an old white man and dead. Maybe some of the women in rationalism can be celebrated.
I mean, if it was the 80s, we probably would have had Madeleine Murray O'Hare up on that wall.
Oh, yeah, there's a New Zealand link to her, isn't there?
Well, yeah, and actually a very much a rationalist link to her.
Yeah.
She came and spoke in a couple of conferences, but she's now a dead white woman. So, we fix one thing, but not maybe the other two.
A murdered white woman, right?
Yeah.
Kidnapped and murdered, and something to do with the money coming to New Zealand after her death. It was all very weird.
Very weird indeed. Well, kudos to Patsy. I'm excited to hear about more of her work and this sort of polite anarchism that seems to be going on at the NZARH.
They look really professional. They do look like little museum tags that you find beside pictures or artworks, don't they?
Yeah, she's done a good job of making it a little bit subtle, but not that subtle. So if you know what you're looking for, it's definitely obvious.
And of course, there's a bit of a history of pranks at Rationalist House, right?
Yeah. Are you thinking about a communist flag by any chance?
I think students put it up, right, to protest the Rationalists.
Yep, that's right. And the Rationalists were in denial about the fact that they were in bed with communists, just claiming this definitely wasn't the case. But yeah, the students didn't believe them. And I don't know whether they broke in or just snuck in and went upstairs and hung the hammer and sickle out the front of Rationalist House.
Yeah, I just remember the nice photo from the newspaper of the guy trying to get the flag down from out the front of the building.
Yeah, so I've written like 2 out of 3 parts of a series for the Rationalist Journal about their history as documented in the police file that they had. So I think that article will be in the 3rd part. I don't think I've covered that yet, but it is a nice part of the NZARH history. And, you know, it was connected to a serious point that the police were basically turning up undercover to meetings and convincing people to be snitches and let them know about meetings because they were worried about connection with known communists.
But they did also spend a lot of time kvetching about not having an assistant to do all the shorthand for them. They felt that work was, like, taking notes at the meeting was very much beneath them.
The police kept, especially in the early days, like I think the 1930s the file was first opened, but they did keep asking for a woman that could that take shorthand notes for them, because obviously it was beneath a man to do that job.
Alrighty, well now, to talk a little bit more about a different sort of civil disobedience, Katrina, you are actually going to be the first segment of this episode. New Zealand police have now provided some updated guidance on how their frontline officers should be handling sovereign citizens. And, and often sovereign citizens try to have some creative means to bypass the ramification of their criminal or illegal actions. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what those tips and tricks the New Zealand police have given their frontline staff?
Yeah, well, that's it, basically. Thanks, Bronwyn.
Next episode, next topic.
I'm curious now as to whether there's a section on rationalists in the police manual now or something. Maybe in the 1930s there's something in there about, arresting rationalists. I would have thought that would be an incredibly boring experience, but it sounds like the history is a little bit more colourful than I would have thought.
Yeah, I think at one point in New Zealand's history there were people out there seeing communists everywhere. Tim, you know a bit more about that, don't you?
I looked at it a while ago. I can't remember. I just remember that image as the main thing I remember from the photographs in the archives you took.
I think when we last talked about it, you said basically in the broader context that there was kind of almost a little mini McCarthyist looking for communists in New Zealand within the police, that maybe someone had come from overseas and was kind of suggesting that communism was more of an issue than it was.
No, that's a different case. That was a hoax during the Second World War. That was a fraudster who came out of prison and managed to convince a security advisor from Britain and the members of the cabinet that there were Nazi spies in Rotorua, and he got given money and got put up in a hotel, and it was a complete hoax.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a slightly different story.
I've definitely conflated my stories then.
Yeah.
Too much going on. And
anyway, Katrina, back to you and soft sits.
Yeah, anyway, kind of dodging the point. But yeah, there is a police manual that exists, and there is a chapter in the manual on managing sovereign citizens, which has been updated for good reason. And it's quite interesting just poking into these things that you can find on the internet. There's a link in the latest newsletter just to that chapter. You can go and have a look. But I've also written about sovereign citizens before. There was sort of a 3-part series, if you want to go back through the archives. Talked about it on the podcast as well. So this is an area I'm sort of quite interested in, particularly how it's playing out in New Zealand with justice of the peace, police, and in the courts, and what sort of arguments people are making. So if you're interested in some of their strange internal logic, then that series should be your go-to. But in this guide, they have sort of a general approach that in there is a change from what it's said in the past, and it's basically saying do not fight them on their own turf, do not debate a sovereign citizen, just assert your authority, that you sovereign citizens or people claiming to be sov-cits or whatever they are subject to they've got the same rights and they need to follow the same rules as all other New Zealanders, but don't involve in an argument because it's not going to change anything. And all that will happen is you end up in a situation with a much longer conversation or fight, and it might escalate. And there's been situations where sovereign citizens have been involved in violence. I guess the most notable one was in Australia recently. So that was last year's Desi Freeman. That was not the name he was born to. He renamed himself Freeman, which is a bit of a sign of a sovereign citizen.
Yeah, so not a case of nominative determinism, though. He didn't become a free man because that was his surname. He changed his surname, I guess, to advertise the fact that he's a sovereign citizen.
Yeah, I think possibly, but that's just what he believed in, and he wanted to label himself as a free man, because the key thing around sovereign citizens is they see the corporate entity created by the state, their legal identity, is different from their flesh and blood self. So by giving yourself the name free man, you're saying, I am the human. And so he was just born Desmond Philby, not a very exciting name, and he renamed himself Desmond Freeman, but he was called Desi Freeman by the media. But in that case, you can see why the police are concerned about, where some sovereign citizens could go. And by saying this is a really broad brush. There's all sorts of people that have sovereign citizen-ish beliefs. Not all of them believe the same thing, and definitely not all of them are violent, but there are enough of them to be concerned about that the police are trying to just be a bit cautious. So in the case of Desi Freeman, he is probably one of the most notorious sovereign citizens they ever had, because he challenged the Australian courts and government authorities, basically saying, you have no legal authority over me. He used all the pseudo-legal arguments that sovereign citizens use to fight traffic offences and other legal things that he got in trouble for. So the police went to his property, so it was in Victoria, Australia, and this was mid-spring, maybe last year, and they had a search warrant, and they were after him for child sexual offences allegations. And we have to use the word allegations everywhere here, because the police, he opened fire, killed 2 police officers, seriously injured a third, and then fled. There was a giant manhunt which lasted until 7 months, and then in March this year they found him at a remote property, and there was an armed confrontation and he was shot and he's dead. So that's why everything's allegedly, so yes, a couple of police plainly did get killed, he got shot, but you can't charge a dead person with a crime, so everything's allegedly. But you can see why this is an issue, that police have died. And so in that search, there were New Zealand police involved in the manhunt for him as well. The Australian police called upon help. That gives you an example. There's also been sovereign citizens get themselves into places they shouldn't get. So espionage, getting into using fake IDs and getting into parliament grounds, government buildings, things like that. And so that in 2024, that hit the headlines. And then last year, a soldier with Sovset beliefs that was tied to some far-right extremist groups, he tried to pass some sensitive from the military with base maps and things like that to other parties. So, there are sovereign citizens trying to engage in spy-like activities. They're not doing particularly well, but, it's just a New Zealand sample of what's going on. So I guess the things we're seeing, they do talk a little bit about, well, how do you know you've got one? And so they've just got a smattering of words. If someone's saying, I'm a real person, I'm a living person being, that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but that could be a sovereign citizen. I'm a free man in the land, I do not consent to contract, and referring to old antiquated legal things like Admiralty law, Magna Carta, Sui Juice, and the Postmaster General. All of those sort of weird things are signs that someone might be, have soft beliefs.
I've been binge watching US police videos of roadside stops, basically traffic stops, and a lot of them are sovereign citizen ones. And another indicator that someone's a sovereign citizen is that when the policeman mentions sovereign citizen, they absolutely deny that that's what they are. A lot of sovcits, they just don't like that phrase. They're like, nope, I'm not a sovereign citizen. Like, they don't ask, oh, what's that? Or, cluelessness. They just totally deny. And then obviously all their actions just betray the fact that they are a sovereign citizen.
Not driving, I'm travelling.
Yeah, exactly. That's one that comes up a lot.
One.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's to do with your it's complete misinterpretation of some laws about your right of free movement, and that somehow if you call it travelling, it's not driving.
Yep, not engaged in commerce. I'm travelling in my private capacity.
It won't work. So there's fake IDs and all sorts of things out there. But the police actually, if they come across someone that's got these sovereign citizen indicators, it's a good way to get yourself in the database. So they have steps they have a national intelligence database called NIA. So they need to record that in the database, and they need to put certain keywords in that would tag it as a sovereign citizen, like sovcit or sovereign citizen, in the notes. So it can be easily found, and that will also let future police officers or anyone handling with them that that's happening. They also need to let the Security Intelligence and Threat Group know, SITG, know about it. So this feels a little bit like, okay, don't make a bomb joke when you're going through airport security kind of territory. If you start spousing sovcit stuff, you could get yourself in a database. Also, if you've got a firearm license and you start spouting this sort of stuff, then the police need to notify the Firearm Safety Office. If they think that you represent a national security threat, then they need to tell their national security group. So you could end up in like 4 things just for spouting a bunch of nonsense at a police officer, possibly because you were speeding or something like that. And if you use a fake ID, you can obviously get charged with a crime for doing that, particularly if you enter Parliament building. That's not a great way to go about things. There is also diplomatic passes that some of them have. So this is the Te Moana Nui Kiwa Sea Pass. It's sort of, I think, Admiralty law. So MFAT does issue diplomatic ID cards, but never to New Zealand citizens. So it's only to foreign national diplomats and their family members. There are no examples of that diplomatic ID on the internet. They protect what that looks like so people can't copy it, presumably. But it says in the guide that it's got a coat of arms on it. But if you end up looking at a kind of an ID that's got Moana Nui Kia Sea Pass on it, it's got a lot of red on it, sort of a weird flag with 4 blue and star, that kind of thing, that is not a real thing. That's a fake national identity card, and it says on it this diplomatic privileges, and it says the person's basically immune to everything, immunity from legal processes, and it's got all these weird things just written on the back of it that you wouldn't expect to be written on a diplomatic ID card. You'd expect just to say who the person is. So, you know what? If you're a diplomat and you get a speeding ticket and you get an infringement notice, you can't get out of it. You don't get diplomatic immunity for infringement, speeding tickets, things like that. It doesn't exist. Run-of-the-mill driving offences, diplomats have to pay the fee. These are more serious driving charges, such as, you're something that could have charges. There's a special process that the diplomat has to go through to get exempted or a waiver from those charges. So even if this was a diplomatic card, it doesn't help them for the kinds of things that they're trying to get out of. The other thing that police come up against from reading this manual is officers being trespassed. So this is, I guess, a way of trying to stop a police officer from arresting you, perhaps. So they come onto your property and you dress them. That won't work. Police are allowed to private property and knock on your door, knock on multiple doors, come back multiple times and knock on your doors. And that's an implied license for them to go on the property unless you revoke it by locking a gate or perhaps telling them to go away, putting up a sign or asking for a search warrant. They can't actually enter your house without your permission or a warrant. If police tell someone they're under arrest before being asked to leave, then they can carry on arresting them. I mean, that would be a great get-out-of-jail-free card, wouldn't it? If you're mid-arrest and all someone had to do was say, just please leave. And they went, oh, okay, all right, we'll go away now. That won't work. And there are special rules. If there's firearms and imminent risk present, then the police might be able to do some more things. Sheriffs are really interesting. So these individuals claiming they're sheriffs. Can you imagine someone as a police officer coming across someone who is a sheriff wearing a silver star saying they're kind of in charge now? There are sheriffs in New Zealand, but these are a bit like bailiffs are for the district courts. They're officers of the superior courts, and they do things like serving summonses and subpoenas. So they're not cowboy and western sheriffs walking around with cowboy hats, and they definitely don't wear silver stars. So sheriffs do exist in New Zealand, but they're a lot more boring than what we would think from movies. And they don't exist in the way that subsets. You can't just make yourself a sheriff. You need to be appointed. And the other one, this is Magna Carta. I mean, this is a bit of an oldie, it keeps coming up. But the Magna Carta is really just, there's only one article of the Magna Carta. It is just saying that the government can't punish someone because it wants to, and any loss of liberty, property or rights must be based in the law and on a fair legal process, and justice must be available to everyone equally without any kind of corruption in the justice system, discrimination or delay. And it's written in older English, and it includes the word sort of free man and that kind of stuff. But the reference to free man is no longer interpreted that way, literally. It's more the courts understand that means it applies to everybody, so it's not just people who declare themselves as free. Everyone in New Zealand enjoys that right. But I guess more importantly, the courts have found that you can update legislation, and so the new laws that pass can supersede the Magna Carta. So a lot of what is in the Magna Carta already in other pieces of legislation, and I would say specifically the Bill of Rights Act. There's just 3 parts of that, 2 to 25, and they deal with detention and that completely replaces any kind of other interpretation you might come up with in the Magna Carta. And I guess the final sort of bit is these information requests, and what I would say is it's I guess paper terrorism it's called. So this is where SovSit, and other people do it sometimes as well, basically bomb an organisation with lots and lots of information requests. And that makes it really hard to work out what's going on, because the problem is that public organisations, so local council bodies and the government organisations, they're bound by official information, which means that if someone makes a request, then you do need to respond to it. But the problem with sovereign citizen requests, it might go on for days and pages and pages and pages, and there might be a request buried in there somewhere, but it's very hard to find. And the way that things are phrased are very difficult to work out what the request is, or if there is a request. So you could have someone just outright asking for information, that's easy. You might have someone who starts the sentence with, is it not true? So this is a way of asking an opinion. Do you agree with what I'm saying? So it's hard to know if it's a genuine request or whether it is an assertion, and they're asking the police for opinion on whether they agree with them or not on their interpretation of a piece of legislation, for example. And so that in that latter case, there's no requirement to respond. Only data and information and facts need to be provided. The police are not or provide legal opinions. If they want legal opinions, they need to go and hire a lawyer and get a legal opinion.
Definitely a thread that you see if you browse through OIA requests on the website fyi.org.nz. A lot of them are just standard requests where people are doing research or maybe preparing to write an article or something, but there is a subset where people use OIA requests, Official Information Act requests, just to accuse the government, to harass the government, like, asking for lots of information, or as you say, like, asking questions in a way that is it's begging the question. It's accusing them of having done something wrong. And it's painful to read them, just thinking about these government departments and just the amount of nonsense they have to put up with, because they have to treat them all as serious legal requests for information and not just dismiss them, right? They have to treat them all with the same gravity.
Yeah, yeah. And what they say is, and this is a good point, if it's not an official information or a local government information request, if it doesn't meet the criteria for that, then you don't respond to it as one. You just say, this is not that kind of request, or end of story. If you do respond as an information request, then you have to, and you're not providing the information, you need to quote the piece of legislation under which you're not providing the information, such as private information, or the information doesn't exist, or it's going to require extensive collation, those kind of things. But if it isn't, then you need to say that up front. But with these people, there's just so much crazy wall to wall. It's really hard to work out what's what. Literally a sentence might be hard to pass, but then you've got, pages and pages and pages of this. So yeah, some poor sod has to go through and read it. I don't know if AI would help with this. I suspect it wouldn't. I suspect it would be just as bamboozled, or it would assume something's a question when, you know what I mean? Like, it might give things legitimacy that maybe, it is phrased the wrong way and it isn't a question, it's asking for verification. So one of the examples was telling, and this was so there's some examples in the guide, and it's looking at some examples of the requests that are made and the responses, and I guess it's just talking about the fishhook that's in there. So an example of a request might be, is it not true that all law in New Zealand is contract law and consent makes the contract? And another example is, does the New Zealand Police acknowledge that New Zealand is a common law jurisdiction? And the example response is, well, this is a request for advice about aspects of the law in the OIA Act, but it doesn't, the OIA Act doesn't apply to your request because it's a request for advice and we don't provide that kind of advice. And it makes a comment like, this looks pretty innocuous, like, common law, properly understood, is part of New Zealand's legal system, and this request might look harmless in that regard. Just saying, common law applies doesn't seem like a bad thing to say. But common law, in sky quotes, as Sovsits understand it, is not part of the New Zealand legal system. And so this isn't a request for information, but an attempt to use the OIA to compel a police to express an opinion, which they don't need to do. So I guess, that's a trick, It's quite subtle, because just anyone getting that will go, well, duh, common law applies to everyone. That's what's called common law. But the problem is that the definitions that the Sovsits have in their head is not the same definition that a lawyer or police officer might have in their head. So, yeah, it was an interesting little dip into that. And I think, just taking away from the main point is really just for the police just to stick to their guns in terms of being calm and just asserting their authority, and that, same laws apply to everybody, and not trying to have an argument with them on earth, because that way lies crazy. You're not going to convince anybody to change their mind and not be a soft sit. And I would think, of all the people, police officers probably not in the position to change a soft sit's mind. It's not going to happen. They would see the police officer as a person of authority enforcing the injustice of the system that somehow get against them.
Thank you for that, Katrina. Do you know how often the police have to update those sort of guidance or documents, or is it just something that they do on an ad hoc basis?
I think it's on an ad hoc. I mean, I just assumed it's an ad hoc basis and they've just done this one chat. But yeah, I don't really know. But I would have thought that when they have a need, they have a need, and that they would go in and make those updates as required.
I guess it'll be interesting to see if the sovereign citizens get their hand on this and then alter or try to find yet more loopholes to get around these tactics.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of wondering, because I was talking about the AI before, and I just wonder what that's done to some of these SovSit documents as well, in terms of whether they're using AI to produce the mountains of paper. A bit of a disaster, because you'd just be getting more and more of it, and then still at the end some some human being has to sit there and look through it to make sure that we haven't missed anything. So, yeah, I guess that's the paper terrorism, but also there are some very real safety threats as well when things escalate.
Well, thank you, Katrina. Now, Mark, you, Tim, and I had the extreme misfortune of taking in a free screening of this quote-unquote film, Universe Design. I think we all kind of came away with the opinion that was, like, it committed the greatest sin of being god-awfully boring. But come on, let's tell Katrina and the rest of our audience what they should be thankful for missing.
Yeah, this isn't just a me thing. Like, 3 of us went, so please, guys, be equal partners.
I slept for quite a bit of it.
Oh, okay, we're not quite equal partners as to the suffering we went through then. Obviously, some suffered less than others. Tim, did you fall asleep at all during it?
No, but I wish I could have. Yeah, it wasn't just been on and on with the same level of, like, heightened, how do you describe it, like, atmosphere. Like, it's pumped up the music. It's got the stereotypical sort of voiceover saying profound sounding things with stock footages of planets and forests and whatever else. But it just kept in that state the whole time without kind of, what's the phrase? Like, without releasing that tension for the entire 1.5 hours.
That's the surprise, right? It was only an hour and a half. It felt like a lot more than 1.5 hours worth of documentary, but that's all we suffered for. And so just for a little bit of background, this is a documentary called Universe Designed. I think it came out last year elsewhere, but last week was the New Zealand premiere. And a local organisation, Thinking Matters, the same organisation that ran the Ask an Atheist event that Tim and I went to a couple of months ago, they put this on and managed to find a bunch of churches around New Zealand that were willing to play this premiere. They gave away free tickets, so you just went onto the Thinking Matters website and could get yourself a free ticket. I did that and got us 3 tickets, so all of us could go and suffer equally or nearly equally. And we went to the supermarket just beforehand. Bronwyn, you'd already bought snacks, but I picked up some popcorn because I thought that would be fun. Now, did you had the Gumdrops Whittaker's chocolate?
Yeah. I mean, if you like Goody Gumdrops ice cream, it does a really good job. But I'm not going to buy. I just don't enjoy it that much.
All right, there's a skeptical hot take for everybody. Don't do that. I went for just caramel popcorn. I thought it was just nice that we sat down in a church eating popcorn, eating chocolate, while watching this documentary. Turns out we weren't the only ones there that had bought food. Like, there were a bunch of teenagers. A lot of people in the audience were teenagers. It might have been 30 people other than us there altogether, and there seemed to be 2 groups of students there.
I have to say, that's kind of humbling for the skeptics, because globally we're sort of having this conversation about how do we get young people into skepticism? Well, maybe we should be screening movies about intelligent design, because that's somehow bringing in the young people.
Yeah, or telling them that if they don't come to the movie and, follow our beliefs, that they're going to burn in a fire for eternity. Maybe that could get more people to turn up to skeptics in the pub.
No. They can't go on the mission trip to Japan. That's what they can't do.
But anyway, so this was local to me. This was really nice because it was in Whitby, which is my suburb, in Porua in Wellington. So it was nice and close. You guys both drove to me and came to my house, and then we just drove a few minutes out to the event. As I said, maybe 30 or so people. It wasn't hugely busy, but it wasn't a total bust. The audience was okay. And then at the beginning of the playing, we had a couple of intros. So we had the CEO of Thinking Matters first, Rowan Locke, he talked, and then there was an intro from the filmmaker, Michael Ray Lewis. And it's the same kind of stuff that I've read in interviews, basically, that his whole shtick, his reason he came to Christianity, the reason he's making this documentary, he was happy as an atheist, happy as a clam, just doing his thing. And then his wife came home one day and said that she was considering going back to church, that she was thinking of returning to being a Christian, and he had to grapple with this fact. And the way he solved this problem of his wife refinding religion was that he found religion as well, that he became a Christian, solved the problem. I found a really interesting interview with a weird organization called Mama Bear Apologetics, and in that one he said that as an atheist, he was skeptical about the church, that he loved documentary documentary films like Zeitgeist. And that to me was hilarious, because Zeitgeist is not a well-researched, well-laid-out movie. It's a conspiracy movie. So he wasn't the skeptic that he says he was, as far as I can tell. He was a conspiracy before he became a Christian. So possibly ripe for the picking as someone believing something without good evidence. I don't know. But did you guys, what did you guys think about like his intro and how he came across?
I think the strangest thing was that pretty sure he said that this film is like his way of telling that story of like why there's such great reasons to believe. But that was the last we heard of him until the very, very, very end, when he was asking a question in an interview.
You guys said in the pub afterwards that I think you were both expecting him to be kind of the active participant in the documentary who was out searching for answers and interviewing creationists. But as you say, he didn't really show up in the movie. He wasn't someone there asking the hard questions and trying to find the answers to life, the universe, and everything.
It was basically a bunch of talking heads. Like, there are YouTube videos that have done a more passionate job arguing their position than the director did. I was kind of interested in his claim that he did lots of horror films. He's done like a handful of horror shorts, like short films, from the J.J. Abrams school of cinematography with all the lens flares.
But his back catalogue as cinematographer, it's mainly shorts. There's really not much in it. But I realised, like, at first it was like, hey, this guy's not an accomplished movie maker. Like, there's not really much under his belt. But then I was this guy made a full hour and a half documentary. He actually managed to put it together. It took him 3 years, but I was actually kind of impressed that, it didn't look bad, right?
Yeah, it looked flash.
Yeah.
But I see YouTube videos about that quality. Now, maybe that's something to be said about the quality of our software now, that the boundaries are so blurry that you can't really tell unless you are an expert in film and you're expert in sound and you're expert in lighting to be able to make a comment about, oh yeah, no, this is definitely a like $80,000 production versus say an $8 million production. Not saying this was an $8 million production, but it looked, you had your fast cuts, as you see on YouTube. The video was crisp, the audio was clear, the lighting was good. But I guess we all were all making comments, or we had noticed a lot of things regarding the stock footage that they're using. Because I was like, when they showed their black hole, I'm like, was this an Interstellar? Like, did they just borrow this? Did they just take some clips?
It was the same modeling, I think, that was used in Interstellar for the black hole.
Most of the visual treats in that sense, these pretty beautiful shots of like the universe and galaxies and planets and whatever else, were all in the first 20 minutes. And then they kind of recycled some of it later in the film. But after that point, it became really domestic, and a lot of people sitting, a lot of people being slowly into a building or opening a book or hunching over a laptop in slow motion. So yeah, for those first 15 minutes, I was like, oh, this could be not too bad. And yeah, it was downhill from there.
That first 10-15 minutes, like, I had nothing to object to when it started. Like, it started off with these awesome shots of the universe and planets and all sorts. And the voiceover started off talking about the importance of evidence and not believing things without evidence. And it was like, hey, I'm here for this. Like, I can't disagree with this. And then it started going a little bit wrong. Like, immediately, the quality of the talking heads, the quality of the people they were interviewing, it was like, these aren't great people. They're well-known apologists, but they're not academic apologists. So we had, Frank Turek and Andy McDowell. We then had thrown in a couple of creationists, so Old Earth creationists, but Hugh Ross and Stephen Meyer, who I'm sure a lot of skeptics love to hate. And then a couple of people just to make it seem more relevant. So there was Elisa Childers and a YouTuber I'd never heard of before called Alan Parr. But yeah, the first 10-15 minutes, it kind of went from awe of science and awe of the universe to then talking about fine-tuning. And this is, one of the big arguments of creationists, old Earth creationists especially. Young Earth creationists, like, everything's out the window, right? It's the Earth is 6,000 years old, the universe is 6,000 years old. People used to hang around with dinosaurs until very recently. The entire world was covered in water in a flood. But the more nuanced idea that the Earth is old, that, a lot of what science says is true, but that the devil is in the details. The idea with kind of old Earth creation is that maybe there are little hints that there are things that couldn't have happened naturally. And the one they go for, first off, is fine-tuning. So it's the idea that if we look at physics, if we look at all the kind of constants that there are to physics, all the values like the charge of an electron and the size of the Planck length and things like this, that if you change any of them just a little bit, then suddenly the universe doesn't evolve the same way that it has done for our universe, that maybe it collapses on itself too quickly before any galaxies can be created. If gravity's a little bit stronger, or if gravity's weaker, maybe it just keeps expanding so much that gravity doesn't have a chance to pull matter together and make stars and then later on make planets. And so there's a bunch of these variables where the argument is that surely it's fine-tuned, surely these things are exactly the value they are because it allows for life to evolve like us. You guys got any arguments against this? I did mention something in my article, but any thoughts on that one?
It's just that we exist. We are the exception, so we can't talk about any of the other events that yes.
So we can only exist in a universe that will support life, right? If it doesn't support life, no one will ever be there to ask the question.
So all the other universes that didn't make it, that can't support life, they're not having a conversation about this.
And really
they're not alive.
What would be most miraculous is if we were surviving in a universe that wasn't supporting life at all. Like if we could survive in spite of that. I mean, that would really be miraculous and need explanation.
Yeah, this something does exist and is amazing. Doesn't mean there was a whole... I mean, even on Earth, there were so many life forms on Earth that never made it. So many branches of the evolutionary tree that went absolutely nowhere. And we happen to be here kind of flukily. But, you know, if we'd been on one of those other branches, we wouldn't be having a conversation about this, you know, because the dinosaurs never made it. So there's no dino people talking to each other about this, going, hey, isn't it amazing? We must be the exception. We've been created on purpose because we're so amazing. The dominant life form on this planet could have been different. There's just been a lot of, you know, and then they'd think they were special.
Yeah, exactly. Like if when it rains and the water pools into a groove in the concrete, it doesn't mean that the concrete and the groove was carved for the puddle that formed after that point.
Obviously, also, most of the universe is not hospitable to life, right? The vast majority of the universe will kill life in pretty much any form that it could take. It's too hot or it's too cold. We're having problems finding life. You know, we're getting better and better with our radio telescopes, etc., etc. Even so, we're not finding any life nearby. We're still looking. We're not finding anything. So, yeah, it's an argument that has some interest. Like, I don't think scientists have solved the fine-tuning thing. You know, there are ideas like the multiverse, that maybe there are lots of universes, and obviously life is only going to be there to ask the question in the ones that are successful, that have the right constants. There are other arguments that maybe some of these variables, they're not just sliders. You can't just choose any given value. Maybe there's some fundamental way in which they're forced into certain constraints, and that might reduce the amount of options that there are. But it's an interesting question. It's a good start. From there, we went on to the Kalam cosmological argument. And this one, I've got some kind of grasp of why it's wrong, but it's the idea basically that, you know, modern models of the universe basically have the universe starting at a Big Bang. We have a beginning. We have a place where the universe started to be, and then there was rapid expansion, and then yay for first generation stars, lots of supernova, blowing the heavier materials that were made in those stars out to make second generation stars and planets like ours that have all these heavier elements and allow us to be us. But the argument here basically is that because it began, it has to have a cause, that there has to be something beforehand that caused the universe to begin. And my one issue with this, an argument that I think makes sense to me, is the idea that cause is a temporal thing. It's to do with time. So basically, when you cause something to happen, it's a time-based thing, and time is a property of the universe. Like, time is a part of what our universe is, along with matter, energy, and space. And so the idea of causation outside of the universe doesn't necessarily make sense, that there can be no kind of cause and effect. There isn't really a pre-something, and then something does a thing that creates a universe, because it's not, what we understand as cause and effect, or causing something to be. It's all based on time, and if you don't have time, you can't do that. So they're arguing for existence of a god that's existed forever before the universe, but time isn't outside of the universe, or at least time as we know it.
Logical leap, isn't there, from a cause to having that requiring an intelligent being to be that cause, because why?
Yes, rather than any kind of blind processes. And then you've got all this
magical thinking going on, and now they're worried about causation?
Yeah.
It just feels a bit like pick a side.
But of course, there's also, similar to the Paley argument about the designer and things needing a designer and that designer needing a designer. Now we've got a causer need its own. Their argument, of course, is that God always was, that he is the uncaused. But why? Why can't the universe be the uncaused cause? Why does the buck stop at their God and not at our universe, or at their God's creator on the other side? Like that, I think they arbitrarily choose where the stopping point is to support their belief.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is to support their belief. It's not a scientific exploration to work out what's actually going on, whatever that is. It's to, they don't have the option of going, well, we don't know, and maybe there's nothing caused it, and maybe there's no God.
So that was physics over and done with. They moved on to biology, and at this point, it was disappointing, basically. Like, they didn't even have good arguments. They just threw out a few supposed facts. They mentioned the Cambrian explosion. They talked about the magic of DNA. They talked about cellular machinery and how complex it was, but they didn't go into any details. They didn't kind of drill down and give any concrete examples. They just mentioned it very generically without going into details. And that was kind of disappointing. I wanted to hear these intelligent design arguments, and we just didn't get them.
Yeah, that's what sort of made me feel like this is just an extended trailer, a 1.5 hour long trailer for some other movie that's going to happen. Because like I said, they just mention these things without really going into much depth that I'm sure these apologists would want to, but I wonder if it's maybe trying to be like theology agnostic, is that they want this film to appeal to a broader audience of churches. So they don't want to get into too much detail about like Cambrian explosion, where supposedly these animals just popped into existence, but like, well, that's not the Garden of Eden. Like, they don't explain it in terms of theology or like any real detail there.
Yeah, to me, I had this wonder whether maybe this was because, like, from the early 2000s onwards, a lot of the intelligent design arguments from biology have been thoroughly trounced. And, biology has gone to, or biologists have gone to a lot of effort to patiently explain why the ID arguments, the intelligent design arguments, are not valid. And so maybe they decided not to go into details because they know that the counter arguments are out there and easily accessible.
Yeah, or I wonder if maybe the political Christianity, because originally intelligent design was a political kind of enterprise by the Discovery Institute to get creationism into schools and to stop the teaching of evolution. And they thought if they could make it either teach the controversy, so force them to teach their intelligent design stuff, or just make teachers too scared of engaging with that material and just leave it out of the classroom altogether, they win in either case. Whereas now that kind of political agenda isn't as sophisticated anymore. You think of like the Trump supporters and the evangelicals and what kind of things they're believing now, what they're promoting now. I wonder if maybe it's veered more towards the young earth, flat earth, even like kind of belief system. So intelligent design is almost like too many concessions to the scientific community for them, perhaps. And they don't want to get into risk maybe being seen as too cozy to the evil scientists who tried to push the vaccines on us, who tried to close down the churches during COVID.
I think that's what I'm kind of come back to, is that we actually had quite a few people who their byline when they were interviewed was that they are a professor. They never gave the full name of the university. They only really ever gave the initialism. Some of the scenes. You had the various talking heads lecturing in some really nice settings, what we presume could be universities, or maybe it's just really fancy sets. And I guess that may indicate why there is such a hesitancy to talk about like the full extent of intelligent design, because these are universities who still want to be competitive. Like, is it Bob Jones or Liberty? One of those schools calls themselves the Harvard of religious schools. Or that title, the idea of being the Harvard of or the Yale of, is quite important to them. These are universities that do have biology departments. They do have physics and science departments, and they have scientists working there, like people who got traditional postgraduate degrees in traditional institutions who do come to those places to teach and teach science, but also say, yes, we still hold a belief in a young earth or intelligent design. It's interesting in the way that maybe some of them hold back a little bit what they actually believe as a means to at least keep the school competitive as a somewhat legitimate research or educational institution.
I like how we each have our own pet conspiracy theory as to why they didn't go into any kind of useful detail. That is awesome. But where they did go and where it got really disappointing, boring, sleep-inducing was the next 45 minutes. Like, that was the end of the science. We did physics, we did biology, and then we got hit with a 1-2 whammy of theology. So the first part of it was basically trust the Bible. The Bible is trustworthy. You should trust it because it was written by a bunch of people who, it wasn't that long after Jesus died, or at least the New Testament, and there are lots of copies that we found of different bits. So like, this is better than any other historical document ever. They threw a whole bunch of stuff out, and honestly, it was boring, and I'm not an expert in this area, but it felt like it probably academically was lacking a fair bit, but it just really wasn't very interesting for me to watch at the very least. Was this where you fell asleep, Bronwyn, or a little bit later than this bit?
Oh, I think I was falling asleep throughout the entire thing. Like, I was just dozing off throughout, and I get hauled back in anytime they sort of did a big beat, a big, scene change. I come back
They had
in.
the big title cards with just one word in large letters on the screen. But yeah, so that was kind of they were going for the historicity, and you can trust this document that it's truthful. And then it was the come to Jesus bit. The last bit of the movie this is where it went really over the top emotional, and the music that just, it kept building and building and wanting to kind of evoke emotions in you, but it never broke. It never got to the crescendo. It just kept going on, and it just got kind of tiring after a while, that it was constantly trying to play on your heartstrings. And then that's where we got back to a lot of stock footage of waves hitting rocks and beautiful green forests and things like that.
One quote I remember from the film is where they talked about why young people are leaving the church. And the person speaking said that it's because of concerns about incompatibility between science and religion, and that evolution's to blame for this. And what I immediately thought was, well, probably not nowadays, given that we've just had a pandemic where a lot of these evangelicals were anti-vax, were claiming that Satanists were trying to stop church services, that it was all a hoax, or that it was some demonic conspiracy, or all these things, and seeing people at their church go berserk about the vaccine and about other political kind of events, like just denying really obvious reality and facts. I suspect that's currently more what's driving people away from the church, that and of LGBT by the church. I think those are probably the predominant ones, whereas maybe 15 years ago, evolution was more the thing. It felt like a really dated kind of conception of young people and why they're turned off by the church nowadays.
Yeah, definitely seems to be different to just evolution. Like, as we've said, that was so 20 years ago, right? That was a thing that's kind of pretty much been and gone. But I guess it's the Discovery Institute's thing, right? As an organization in the US that really pushes for this intelligent design, and I guess has probably fundraised a lot of money because they're fighting for the Christian cause. I guess it's probably in their best interest to promote the boogeyman of evolution, to get people within Christianity worried about how evolution is scaring kids away from the church, because that'll mean more donations for them. Again, this could be a conspiracy theory, but I get the feeling that it's probably good for their pockets to have people thinking that it's evolution that's the problem rather than more subtle social ills.
Oh, I'm just thinking, a lot of what you get thrown at now is throwing people into this. Is this a real video or is this AI video? Is this a real person? And it's just interesting to see that happening, because that didn't used to happen. People would go everything that they saw. And, it is possible that, the younger generation are kind of side-eyeing some of this stuff and then going, well, if I'm questioning that and then this doesn't resonate with me, maybe I can do something different.
So that was the end of the movie, and by the end, I'd had enough. So, the last half was really boring, but on top of that, for the entire movie, the projector screen was so high up, and I'd chosen for the three of us that we would sit near the front. We were second row, but we were craning our necks so much that my neck was hurting for most of the movie. It was really painful, and it's probably just the neck pain that stopped me from falling asleep, because I was definitely feeling it. This was a Friday evening, like a whole week of work, and then just sitting in on what turns out to be quite a boring, not very exciting documentary. So yeah, I think it was just the pain that kept me awake, which is good because I'm a bit of a snorer. Snoring in the middle of a church during a documentary is probably not the done thing.
In the middle, kind of elevator music, or what was that like? Because it sounds like it might have been a little too calming.
No, if you ever go to a church service at a modern evangelical church, often when they get to the end of the sermon or when they're at the point where they're asking for money, they'll get some of the band members to go and just play kind of this emotional music in the background alongside them begging for money from the audience and trying to convince people to, give over their credit card details or swipe their card in the FPOS machine. But churches have learned a very good way of manipulating people emotionally like that. So it was that kind of music, but it just kept trying to build and build and build, but didn't go anywhere.
I've been known to fall asleep in action movies, the ones that just keep going and going. Now they're in cars, now they're in helicopters, and you just kind of run out of, this was exciting, now I don't care, sleep.
Just too much of it.
I just miss the end, oh well.
So after the movie, I checked out the reviews, and they're all Christian reviews. There's really not anybody that's not a Christian watching this, unsurprisingly. The way it works basically is that it's being shown for free in churches, but then there's this impassioned plea afterwards asking people if they can buy a copy on Vimeo and show it to their friends and family. So I guess this is it's the loss leader, it's the freebie that hopefully leads to this guy making his money back for making this documentary. But yeah, because it's Christians, all the reviews seem to be Christian, like Christian movie websites that let you know if there are drug references, if there's violence. And obviously for that one, it pretty much gets a clean bill of health. The only thing that gets flagged is the fact that it has a brief image of one of the planes flying into a building for 9/11. So that's a very brief bit of imagery, but there is a warning on one of the Christian sites that you might not want your children seeing that. But the text of these reviews, it's gushing, it's so positive. At first, I had to go and check with a couple of them. We were thinking about the same movie. It's so positive. And it was well, I did not have that experience at all. It's are there two movies with the same title? But here's some of them that I found. Only after nearly half an hour of scientific groundwork does Universe Designed begin gently introducing explicitly Christian ideas. A brilliant move. I appreciated most was how methodical it was. The film presents a robust case for the trustworthiness of the New Testament. The documentary is incredibly well made and well directed. And for me personally, the film moved me to tears. And this is not the documentary that I watched, but yeah, I guess shilling for Jesus being... Maybe they did genuinely feel like this, but I wonder whether maybe they just feel like it's their Christian duty to just talk about how amazing this was, whether they actually felt that or not.
Well, if you're obliged to be there and be positive about it, but you actually fell asleep, what would you write?
That's a great point.
You leave it to Mark to write because he stayed up.
Yeah.
But no, it was just, I don't know, the setting of the whole place. It was dark, it was uncomfortable, and it was just enough of a snooze fest that I just kept on passing out.
I also got the feeling that some of the church members also were not enjoying it that much. There was a bit of fidgeting that started around about halfway through. I think some people left as well.
Yeah, the guy next to me stopped looking at the screen after about half an hour, but I think that was probably more of the neck pain than it was about just not wanting to watch the movie. But either way, he just stared at the floor for most of the movie.
I think it sounds like a really good movie to take your knitting or something.
Yeah, I don't knit. I think Bronwyn might do, but I don't knit.
I do a little bit of knitting, but I don't like falling asleep while I'm knitting.
I guess with needles, there's a slight risk of something going wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Now, before we sign off for another fortnight, it is time for a brief membership corner. The next Wellington Skeptics in the Pub will be on August 8th at 6 p.m. The Auckland Skeptics in the Pub will be pretty much just a couple of days after our conference. They will be catching up on August 4th at the Dice and Fork starting at 6:30 p.m. Tickets for our conference are still on sale. You can RSVP for our free Friday mixer, which starts at 7 p.m. at the Victoria Free House, which is pretty much right across from our venue in Christchurch. We are also selling tickets for our Saturday night canapes and award show. That'll start at 6:30 p.m. Those tickets are on sale until about Thursday midday when we need to send our numbers up to our caterer. But the tickets for our weekend conference, they're pretty much going on through till, I guess, maybe midday Saturday. Still on sale for all of our events. And I believe the SGU, they still have tickets available for their extravaganza, but you need to buy them separately through their website. So if you want all the important links, please visit our landing page, conference.skeptics.nz, and that has links for the SGU event, as well as it'll take you to our Humanitics page where you can sign up for our conference activities. And as well, you may have heard, early bird tickets are now on sale for D-Cult. That'll be held on October 24th to the 25th, which is basically Labor Day weekend. So if you have any comments, queries, kudos, or concerns, please email us at news@skeptics.nz or podcast@skeptics.nz. That's all for this episode of the Yana podcast. We will be back with more skeptical news in a month because we are taking a bit of a break. The next newsletter articles will be due on the same day as our AGM and the last day of the conference. So we're just giving ourselves a little bit of an extra 2-week break. So you will see us or hear from us again after a little bit of a longer and well-deserved rest.
Is it well-deserved? Do you feel you've worked hard enough to have earned a rest, Bronwyn?
For my newsletter, yes. I think I did a lot of work for that newsletter article.
It was a very good article. For all the articles that we don't get to mention on the podcast, you can go to articles.skeptics.nz. There's a bunch of stuff that doesn't make it there, and there's a bunch more detail for the stuff that you have heard, where we go off on weird tangents, and there's a whole bunch of links for further reading. So if you find the podcast just isn't enough, that you just need more of this in your life, go to articles.skeptics.nz and fill your boots.
Exactly. And well, I guess that's all for us now. So, kakite from me.
Until next time.
Bye.
See ya.